Absolutely. Here's part one of your story. They hurt her best friend, now the arena. Is there grave written in third person, and in your chosen no punctuation immersive style around? 550 words long and focused on emotion, connection and detail to pull the reader fully in part one. The beginning of the bond. She was the only human cadet among the alien recruits, and the first thing they noticed was how small she was, her frame light, her eyes sharp like cut glass. She did not belong here, not among the scaled and clawed and horned young warriors who had been bred for the fight. She came from a world that had forgotten this kind of struggle. A world that fought with words and codes, not with blood and bone. Yet she stood there every morning. When the twin suns rose over the training fields, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze steady and defiant. They laughed at her in the beginning. They called her fragile. They said she would cry the first time the dust mixed with blood. They said she would run when the first scream echoed through the arena. But she did not cry and she did not run. She stayed, she fought, and though she lost every match for the first 7 days, she kept rising each time with a stubborn spark that made even her enemies watch in silence. That was when she met him, the one they called Care, not a human, not even close. His skin shimmered like polished stone, his movements silent and fluid, his eyes bright like molten gold. He was taller, stronger, faster than any of them, yet there was something gentle in the way he looked at her when others saw weaknesses. He saw will when others saw a fragile thing. He saw the start of something that could not be broken. They were paired together for endurance drills. At first, she hated it. He never spoke, and when he did, his voice was soft in a way that made her unsure whether he was mocking her or protecting her. But over time, the silence between them became something different, something that breathed. She learned the rhythm of his steps, the way he moved before striking, the way he exhaled when tired, the way his eyes softened when she stumbled. But enough. All days became weeks, and the two of them became inseparable. They trained together, ate together, shared bruises and laughter. The others stopped mocking her because no one dared to challenge the bond that grew between them. She learned his language in pieces, not through words but through touch, through trust, through the unspoken promise that neither of them would leave the other behind. He taught her how to move like water, how to strike with purpose, how to breathe through pain. She taught him how to laugh, how to see the stars as more than targets for conquest. Together they became something that the instructors could not explain, a human and an alien cadet moving as one thought, one heartbeat, one purpose. When she looked at him, she no longer saw difference, she saw home, and when he looked at her, his eyes seemed to say, "You belong here, even if the world says you do not." And for the first time since leaving her planet, she believed it. She believed that maybe even in this harsh place, she had found something worth fighting for, something worth losing everything. Fourth morning light broke over the training grounds, and the air carried the hum of machinery and fear. The cadet stood in silence, watching the gates of the arena open like the mouth of a great beast. Its walls shimmered with heat, its metal bones alive with ancient power. She had heard the stories every cadet had. Those who entered the arena either rose as legends or vanished into the dust of its floor. It was not just a battlefield, it was a ritual, a test of who deserved to stand among the strong beside her. Her friend stretched his limbs, his fur catching the pale light of dawn, his movements calm but his eyes sharp. He knew the danger too, but he smiled, the kind of smile that reminded her of all the days they had trained under the twin suns, sweating, bleeding, laughing. She had saved him once when a machine malfunctioned and exploded during drills. He had saved her twice, maybe more. Their bond was the kind that no one understood, not even the overseers who watched with cold eyes and took notes. On every step, every breath, the crowd gathered in tears that rose high above the ground. Thousands of faces from different worlds, shimmering with different colors and shapes. They came for blood, for glory, for the illusion of meaning in the violence. Below, the air trembled with the sound of them chanting the cadet's name and her friend's name, though many cheered for them to fall, not to win. She could feel it like static crawling over her skin, the noise wrapping around her, heart tightening, until it almost hurt. Inside the arena, the ground was cracked, stone and dust mixed with traces of old blood and forgotten names. Every mark told the story of a warrior who had fought and fallen. She knelt, touched the surface, felt its coldness seep into her fingers, and whispered a promise to come back alive for both of them. Her friend leaned close, his breath warm against her neck, and said softly that no one could stop them today, that they were unbreakable, that the stars themselves would bend before they did. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to that hope as tightly as she held her weapon. When the horns sounded, the walls came alive, shifting, forming new paths, towers of stone rising from the earth. The arena itself changed. For every battle, it wanted to confuse its prey, to test the mind as much as the body. The first wave of opponents appeared, shadows against the blinding light. their movements fast and precise, trained killers from across the systems. Her heart pounded. Butterfront was already moving, claws striking the ground, his roar echoing through the air. She followed him, their rhythm perfect, like two halves of one heartbeat. They fought side by side, moving through the chaos, her blades slicing through armor, his strength breaking the walls that rose to trap them. The crowd screamed their names again, now louder, now with awe. But in the Overseer's box above, someone watched with a colder kind of interest, someone who saw not fighters but tools, not hearts, but statistics. The match was meant to end in victory, but behind the glass of the control room another plan began to unfold, unseen. The cadet felt a chill run through her, even as she fought, even as she smiled at her friend. She could not name it yet, but something dark had already begun moving beneath the surface of the arena, and before the sun set, the ground that trembled with cheers would tremble again, this time with something much worse. The air grew heavier as the match dragged on, the crowd restless and wild, the cadet and her friend breathing in the rhythm of survival, each movement sharpened by trust. The dust rose around them like smoke as they fought side by side, cutting through the final opponents that the system released, every blow precise, every dodge instinctive. They were winning, and for a brief moment she thought they might walk out together, laughing as always, victorious against all odds. But high above them, behind the glass of the Overseer's booth, the one who controlled the gates gave a single quiet command, and the light in the arena changed. The walls rippled, the air shimmered, and from the corners stepped figures not listed in the roster, their armor dark, unmarked, their weapons designed for killing, not sparring. The crowd hesitated, unsure if this was part of the show. The announcer said nothing, only static filled the speakers, and then the gates sealed shut with a sound that made the ground itself tremble. Her friend turned to her, his eyes wide but steady, and she knew what he was thinking before he spoke. This was not a test, this was punishment. She did not know why, but she could feel the intent radiating from those who surrounded them. It was hate sharpened into purpose, hate for something they could not control, maybe for the bond they shared, maybe for what they represented, a human and a creature not meant to stand as equals in a place built on old rules and older pride. First strike came fast, metal against bone, a sound that echoed through the arena like thunder. Her friend blocked the blow with his arm, the impact cracking the armor on his shoulder. She ran to him, but more came from behind her. She spun, blade flashing through the dust, cutting one down, two more closing in. She shouted for him to fall back, to regroup, but the wall shifted again, trapping them apart, rising like jaws between them. She could see him through the shimmering barrier, his body moving with wild precision, claws tearing through enemies faster than the eye could follow. The crowd had fallen silent, confusion turning to fear. The Overseers watched unmoved, their faces pale against the blue light of the screens. When the third wave hit, she saw the spear coming. Before he did, she screamed his name, but the sound was drowned by the roar of energy. The weapon struck deep, his body arched, the light from his eyes dimming even as he swung again, tearing one more down before he fell to his knees. She slammed her fists against the wall that separated them, but it did not break. It only hummed with power, reflecting her reflection back at her like mockery. She dropped to the ground, the sound of the crowd distant, the world narrowing too. The sight of him trying to rise, his hand shaking as if reaching for her across the barrier. Then stillness, the dust settled around him like a shroud, and she could not breathe. Her chest heavy with the weight of his stillness. The arena lights flickered above, casting long shadows that crawled over the ground like living things. The Overseers turned off the field, and the walls sank again, leaving her alone among the bodies, her blade slipping from her hand. The silence louder than any scream she had ever heard. Her best friend lay before her, and the world that once felt vast now seemed smaller than a heartbeat. Something inside her cracked, but what replaced it was not tears, it was fire. It was the kind of rage that does not fade. It was the birth of a promise, one that would end with the arena itself buried beneath their ghosts. The dust settled slow and heavy in the still air, the crowd no longer cheering, only whispering in waves of disbelief as the cadet stood frozen in the middle of the arena, her knees weak, her chest hollow, her eyes locked on the body of her friend that no longer moved. The world around her dimmed into a blur of colors and echoes, the sound of footsteps, the metallic hum of the gates closing, the quiet murmur of the Overseer's voices high above. None of it reached her. She only saw him lying there, the one who had laughed with her, the one who had believed in her when no one else did, and now there was nothing left of that laughter, nothing left but blood. On the cracked ground that soaked into the dust like ink fading into paper, she fell to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as they touched his fur, still warm but fading fast. She whispered his name once, twice again, but the sound was swallowed by the silence that had taken over the arena. Her tears came slow burning, her eyes like salt, and she bowed her head, the ache in her throat sharp and endless. She felt something breaking deep inside her, not loud, not violent, just quiet, final, like a string pulled too tight and snapping where no one could see above her. The overseers whispered to each other, one of them saying it was an unfortunate incident, another saying the audience had gotten more excitement than expected, another muttering to clear the bodies and reset the stage, as if this was nothing more than a glitch in the program. They looked down at her and saw not grief but data, not loss but inconvenience. The cadet raised her head and met their gaze through the haze, her eyes, no longer wet but hard-cold, burning with something that no tear could cool. She saw them turn away, and that moment carved itself into her memory sharper than any blade. The guards came to pull her away, but she did not move. At first they shouted at her, but the words were distant, muffled. She finally stood, her hands clenched so tight the blood ran from her palms. She walked past them, carrying nothing but the collar that had fallen from his neck, its tag bent, its edges wet with the dust and his blood. She held it like a relic, her fingers curling around it until her knuckles turned white. The crowd parted as she walked through them, their faces pale, their eyes wide, but no one spoke. No one reached out, they just watched as if she were a ghost passing among the living. When she reached the barracks, she sat on the floor, the collar resting in her lap, the room spinning around her, empty walls and cold lights pressing in. She thought of the first time they met, of how he had barked in laughter when she tripped during training, of how they promised to win together, to leave together. She thought of every moment, every joke, every bruise shared, and felt each one tear open again until she could no longer tell where the pain ended and where she began. Outside, the night fell and the arena lights flickered off one by one until the whole compound sank into quiet darkness. She stared at the collar and whispered again the promise she had made to him once, that they would never lose, that they would never let the arena take their spirits. She whispered it again and again until her voice broke into a rasp and the tears stopped falling, replaced by something colder, deeper, the silence inside her shifting into resolve, the kind that would wait until dawn, the kind that would not forgive, the kind that would make the arena remember. The night stretched long and heavy, the kind that pressed down on the chest until it felt like breathing itself was a battle. The cadet sat alone in the corner of her barracks, the lights dimmed to a faint flicker that cast shadows across the metal floor. She had not moved for hours, her body still, her eyes locked on the small collar that lay across her knees, its surface dull with dust and blood. She ran her thumb over the engraved tag again and again, tracing the name that had once meant home, safety, laughter. Now it felt like a wound that would never close. The compound outside was quiet, but she could hear the low hum of the arena through the walls, a distant mechanical heartbeat that never stopped. Even when the matches ended, she wondered if it was the sound of the dead still echoing through its walls, or maybe the machines remembering the screams they had caused. She could not tell anymore. She closed her eyes and saw him again. The moment he fell, the way his hand reached for her across the barrier, the look in his eyes that said everything. Words never could. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, but it did not stop the image. It would not fade. The other cadets avoided her, none dared to speak. They passed her room like ghosts, afraid to be near whatever she had become. She heard their whispers outside the door. Human, she broke. She lost it. She will not last long. But they did not know the truth. She was not broken. She was awake for the first time. The fire inside her burned cold and clear. It whispered to her in the silence, telling her that this was not over, that something had to answer for what was taken. She stood finally, her legs stiff, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her eyes sharper than they had ever been. She walked to the small mirror on the wall and barely recognized the reflection that stared back, her hair tangled, her uniform torn, her face pale and hollow, but her gaze steady, unflinching like tempered glass. She whispered to herself softly that she would make it right, that they would remember his name not as a casualty but as the beginning of their reckoning. She picked up her weapon from the rack, its blade dull from the fight, and began to clean it slowly, methodically, every motion a ritual, every breath a promise. Hours past the stars outside, shifting through the small window, the light brushing across her face. She did not sleep, could not sleep. Each time her eyes closed, she heard his laugh again, saw his smile, and then the sound of his body hitting the ground, the silence after it, the sound that had broken something inside her. Beyond repair, she leaned against the wall, her head tilting back, staring at the ceiling as if the stars themselves might hear her vow. In the first light of dawn crept through the glass. She rose, her body sore, her mind sharp. She took the collar and tied it around her wrist like a band of memory, its weight grounding her in what was real. She did not cry, she did not pray, she only breathed once, deep, steady, and walked toward the door. The arena waited, and she could already feel its pull, like a living thing whispering her name. She would go back, not as a cadet, not as a participant, but as something the arena had created and would soon regret. Morning air carried the scent of metal and dust, the sky pale and hollow above the training compound. The cadet walked through the corridors, silent, her boots echoing against the floor, every sound crisp in the quiet. Her presence made others step aside. None dared to speak her name. Some stared and then looked away, afraid of what they saw in her eyes. She did not look at them, her gaze fixed straight ahead. On the arena gates that waited at the far end, like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. Again she could feel the pulse of the arena before she even reached it, the deep rhythmic hum of machines waking to life, the same hum that had haunted her all night. Her fingers brushed against the collar around her wrist, the metal cold against her skin, a heartbeat that was not her own but his. She whispered to it, without sound, a vow, a promise she would keep until the end. She stepped into the prep chamber and the guards froze, unsure of what to do. She was not scheduled to fight. Nolas carried her name, but no one stopped her either. Something in her silence made them step back. Doors opened and the light of the arena flooded in, harsh and blinding, the dust swirling like smoke. She walked forward, unarmed at first. The crowd saw her and a ripple of murmurs spread through the tears. The human cadet, the one who had lost, the creature, her friend, the one who should have broken by now but had returned instead. The whispers grew into a low chant, uncertain, curious. The overseers watched from above, their faces pale. She looked up and met their gaze, and the world seemed to still for a heartbeat. She bent down and picked up his weapon, the one left behind. The day he fell, it lay near the center stone, half buried in dust. She wiped it clean with her hand, the weight of it familiar, like his presence beside her. For a moment it almost felt as if he were there again, standing tall, ready to fight. The thought tightened for her chest, but she held it down, breathing slow, her hand steady around the handle. The arena lights flickered brighter, as if recognizing her return. Crowd began to cheer then, but the sound rolled off her like wind against stone. She did not come for them, she came for silence, she came for balance, she came for him. The gates across from her opened and figures stepped out, the same dark, armored soldiers that had struck him down, their weapons gleaming, their movements rehearsed. The overseers had chosen them again to finish what they started, but this time there would be no wall, no separation between her and the ones who had taken everything. She moved before the horn even sounded, her body low, her stride clean. The first fell with a single motion, the second stumbled, and she turned the weapon in her hand like she had practiced 1,000 times with him, each move a memory, each breath a prayer, not of peace but of vengeance. The crowd gasped, the overseers shouted orders, but the arena did not care. It was awake and it wanted blood, and she would give it, not for glory, not for applause, but for silence, for justice, for him. When the last blow landed, she stood in the dust again, her chest heaving, her eyes fixed on the overseers above. They stared down at her, speechless. She lifted the weapon high once, then drove it into the ground, the sound echoing through the walls like thunder. The arena shook, as if alive, and in that moment she knew the fight had only just begun. The arena trembled beneath her boots as if it, too, felt the weight of what had begun, the air thick with dust and the copper scent of blood. The crowd no longer cheering, now only watching, holding their breath. The cadet stood in the center, her body still, her eyes sharp as glass, the weapon dripping in her hand, her heart a steady beat of thunder in her chest. She could hear her friend's voice somewhere in the noise, not as sound but as memory. The whisper that had always guided her: strike true, stay steady, do not stop until it is done. The remaining soldiers regrouped, their armor dented their faces, hidden behind cracked visors. They had trained for war, but they had never trained for rage. Not like hers, she moved before they could ready themselves, the weapon a blur cutting through the haze, her body remembering every motion she had ever practiced with him, each turn, each strike, each breath a rhythm they once shared. It felt like he was there, moving through her, guiding her hand. The bond that death had tried and failed to sever. The first soldier fell hard, the ground shaking beneath the impact. The second tried to flank her, but she spun the weapon, slicing through armor, the sparks flying like dying stars. She did not stop. Her body a storm of motion, her mind silent, no thoughts, only instinct, only fire. Her rage had burned past heat into something cold. Precise, unstoppable, the overseer shouted from above, calling for restraint, calling for guards to intervene, but their voices were small against the roar of the crowd, now alive again, no longer with cheers but with fear. The gates opened again, more soldiers pouring out, their formation tight but their movements uncertain. She saw hesitation in them, the crack of doubt, and she drove into it like lightning, her strikes carving through the line, her steps sure and unbroken. One fell, two fell, three, and then panic spread through them like a sickness. One ran, but the arena walls rose to block his path, the machines sensing weakness shifting the battlefield around her as if the arena itself had chosen a side. The crowd's cries turned from awe to terror as they realized what they were witnessing. This was not sport, not spectacle, it was retribution, the kind that could not be controlled or contained. She heard the overseers behind the glass, ordering to shut it down, to seal the field, to end it, but the systems no longer obeyed their commands. The lights flickered, the hum of the machines deepening into a growl, the air vibrating with the fury of something ancient and awake. She moved through the chaos, her body streaked with dust and blood, the collar around her wrist flashing in the light with every swing. She was not fighting for victory, she was delivering memory. Her movements, graceful and merciless, she could almost feel his presence beside her, his laughter, his courage. She fought for both of them, for what they had lost, for what the arena had taken. She fought until the last of them fell, until the only sound left was the heavy rhythm of her breathing and the whisper of wine through the broken gates. When she finally stopped, she stood among the fallen, her weapon buried in the ground, the crowd silent, their faces pale. The overseers retreated into the shadows. She looked up at them one last time, her expression unreadable, the weight of everything pressing down on her, but she did not falter. She raised her head and whispered words too quiet for anyone to hear, but they were not meant for them. They were meant for him, for her friend, who had believed in her until his last breath. And in that moment the reckoning began, and the arena would never forget her name. There was thick with smoke and silence, the dust rising slow like a ghost. Reluctant to leave the ground, the cadet stood alone among the bodies, her chest rising and falling in sharp, steady bursts, her arms heavy, but her grip unbroken, the weapon still humming faintly from the heat of battle. She could taste the ire of blood on her lips, the weight of exhaustion pressing on her bones, but her eyes did not waver. She looked around at the fallen shapes scattered across the cracked floor, their armor torn, their hands still clutching weapons that would never strike. Again the crowd had gone quiet, not out of respect but fear. They had come for spectacle, they had come for blood, but now they watched death, given back to them not as entertainment but as truth. She could feel their eyes on her, thousands of them, wide and unblinking, but she did not care. She no longer saw them, she saw only the place where he had fallen, the patch of dust now marked by the dark stain that time would never wash away. She walked toward it, slow, deliberate, every step sinking deep into the sand, her shadows stretching long under the trembling arena lights. When she reached the spot, she knelt, her knees pressing into the dirt, her fingers brushing over the ground as if touching him again. She whispered his name, her voice hoarse but steady, and for a moment she thought she felt warmth against her hand, the memory of his presence still clinging to the earth. The collar on her wrist glowed faintly as the arena lights flickered around her. She closed her eyes and breathed in the silence, feeling the pulse of the ground beneath her like a heartbeat answering her. Grief sound broke the stillness. A shuffle of boots behind her, the last of them, the commander, the one who had ordered the ambush, stepped forward, his armor darker, heavier, marked with symbols of authority, his weapon raised. The crowd gasped. The overseers leaned closer from behind the glass, their faces pale. She turned slowly, her gaze meeting his, and in that instant the world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the air tense and electric like the moment before a storm. He spoke words she could not hear, or maybe did not want to. She saw his mouth move, but the meaning was lost in the rush of her blood. She rose to her feet, the weapon firm in her hand, her expression calm, not rage, not fear, just purpose. He charged his blade, cutting the air in a silver arc. She sidestepped, letting the motion pass close enough to feel the wind against her cheek, and before he could turn, she struck once. Plenum final, his weapon fell first, then his body, the sound echoing through the hollow chamber. By the silence that followed was complete, the kind of silence that carried weight and finality. She stood over him, breathing slow, the dust curling around her like smoke, the light dimming, until only she remained visible in the center of the arena, the weapon dripping against the stone. The crowd dared not speak. The overseers dared not move. The arena itself seemed to bow to her in stillness. She looked up at the stands one last time, her gaze sweeping across the faces that had once cheered her suffering. She raised her weapon in a silent salute, not to them but to the memory of the friend who had fallen beside her, and then she lowered it and turned away, leaving the bodies, the dust, and the silence behind. Her every step echoing against the metal floor like the closing of a chapter. But the gates opened before her, the light beyond pale and cold. She did not look back. She did not need to. She knew the arena would remember this day. It would remember her. It would remember him. And it would remember that those who had hurt her best friend now lay buried in the grave they had built themselves. The sun rose slow and red over the ruins of the arena, the light spilling across the shattered walls and broken gates, the dust still heavy in the air, the smell of smoke and metal thick like memory. The cadet stood at the edge of the battlefield, her shadow long across the ground, her body aching but unbent, her heart steady. The noise of the crowd had faded into nothing, the seats empty, the banners torn, the screens blank. Only the wind moved, whispering through the cracks like a voice from somewhere beyond the world. She looked at the ground where her friend had fallen, the stone stained dark, the sand hardened by heat and blood. She knelt there, placing her hand flat against the earth, feeling its quiet thrum, the last pulse of the machines. Still buried below, she whispered his name one last time, her voice soft but shorn. For a moment she felt as if the arena itself listened, the air shifting around her gentle as breath. She closed her eyes and remembered his laugh, the way it rolled through the air like sunlight after storm. She let it fill her until the ache inside her eased. Around her, the soldiers and overseers were gone, the corridors empty, the once proud structure now nothing more than a tomb. She rose and walked through the wreckage, the collar still tied around her wrists, glinting faintly with every step she passed. The training halls, the barracks, the gates she had walked through so many times, and each place seemed small and now quieter, as if the ghosts of those who had fought before her were watching in silence. She did not hurry. She moved with the slow calm of someone who had already seen the end and chosen to keep walking. Outside the walls, the world stretched wide and waiting, the horizon painted in fire and gold. She turned once to look back, the arena standing behind her, vast and broken, its towers cracked, its floors buried under the dust of everything it had consumed. It looked almost peaceful now, like a beast finally asleep. She whispered that it was over, that the screams were done, that the blood it had demanded had finally been answered. She hoped the wind would carry the words to wherever he was, and that he would know she had kept her promise. She stepped beyond the gates, her boots sinking into soft sand, the noise of the city far away, faint like a dream. She felt the sun warm against her skin, the first warmth she had felt in what seemed like forever, and she let herself breathe deep, filling her lungs with air that did not taste of dust and war. She looked down at the collar on her wrist and smiled, the smallest smile, the kind that belonged to both grief and peace. She spoke to him in her mind, telling him that he was free now, that the arena was theirs, no longer behind her. The ground trembled once the last breath of the arena exhaled into the wind, then stillness complete. Final, she did not turn. She walked on until the noise faded, until only her footsteps remained, the rhythm slow and even. She carried his memory with her, not as pain but as strength, every heartbeat a reminder that love, even broken love, could shape the world. She had turned the arena into their grave, and now she walked into the dawn, leaving its ghosts behind her but carrying its truth forever.